Welcome to everyone who's following this panel today on biodiversity loss risk and how investments are adapting to integrating these risks. We have a great lineup of speakers to discuss this issue today. We are about to hearing the views from a central banking supervisor perspective, an investor perspective, a data provider perspective, and also from an academic accountancy perspective. So a warm welcome to our 4 panelists. Their CVs can be found on the conference website, but let me briefly introduce them. We have Matthieu Maurin, founder of Iceberg Data Lab, a fintech providing environmental data solutions with a strong focus on climate and biodiversity. We have Claudia Kruse, managing director, global responsible investment and governance at APG Asset Management. APG manages pension assets of around 550 billion euro on behalf of Dutch pension funds. We have Alexandre Rambaud. He's a senior lecturer at AgroParisTech at the International Center for Research on Environment and Development for Research, and an associate researcher at Paris Dauphine University. And he's also co-director of the Ecological Accounting Chair. Finally, we have Olaf Sleijpen, executive director at the Dutch Central Bank, and he's an alternate member of the Governing Council of the European Central Bank. Olaf has been involved in the work of the NGFS from the start and also represents the Dutch Central Bank in the NGFS Steering Committee. To all 4 panelists, thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Irene Heemskerk. I'll be moderating this panel. I have the pleasure to do that. I work currently as a senior policy advisor at the Dutch Central Bank, and I will be joining the ECB soon to head their Climate Change Center. Before we kick off, some housekeeping rules. We will arrange the flow of this panel will be that we first start on a bit discussing the status quo. Okay, how are financial risks stemming from biodiversity loss can be identified and what is being done about it now? The second round of questions will be more forward-looking because this conference is really based on the actions needed and to identify those. So the question we will discuss then, what next steps will you take and who else need to take action to address biodiversity loss risk? After that, we will have time for a short Q&A with the audience, I hope. You'll find a Q&A box on the left of your screen. There you can type in your questions. And if you have a question for a specific panelist, please identify who it is so I'll be able to guide the question to the right person. We have a sharp deadline at 12:15 Central European Time. So I'm really looking forward to a content-full discussion with this amazing panel. But before we get started, the focus of this conference is on climate risk, as you see in the title. Yet also biodiversity risks are starting to appear more and more on the agenda of the financial sector. You might have been able to follow already the panel that was on biodiversity loss risk on last Wednesday on this conference, and also many other speakers and panelists referred to biodiversity loss as an important risk to look into. And why is that, right? So let me share a few facts with you. The International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, counted that over a quarter of the species worldwide are threatened with extinction. A report published by the UN indicated that we're using about 1.6 times the resources that the nature sustainably can renew. So short-term gains are being over-prioritized over the health of the planet. The extinction of species and the depletion of natural resources will eventually transmit to the real economy and therefore to the financial sector. So specifically, if you realize that more than half of the world economic output is moderately or highly dependent on nature. Therefore, I believe we are dealing with a very, very relevant topic today. So let's kick off our panel. And I have the pleasure to give the floor to Olaf Sleijpen first, because I'm really interested, and I think the audience is as well, to invite you to share your views from a perspective from a central bank and supervisor on the financial risks stemming from biodiversity loss. Last year, DNB already published research on this topic, and I think a big question is, why did DNB decided to look into these risks? Please, Olaf, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Irene. And it's good to be in this panel. And yeah, let me tell you and of course the audience a little bit about our journey. We started working on climate change about 5 to 6 years ago, and about 3 years ago, we also thought, let's have a look at some other sustainability issues and the impact they may have on the financial sector. So we looked at water scarcity, we looked at resource scarcity, and we also looked at human rights controversies. And we said, you know, you can actually maybe draw the same parallel with climate change, because for the financial sector is also exposed to sectors who might actually be endangered by, for instance, water scarcity. And in that report that we wrote, which was called Value at Risk, we also scratched a little bit on the surface regarding biodiversity risks. And then after reading our report, we were approached by the Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency called PBL. And they said, why can we work together on the issue of biodiversity loss or risks and the impact on the financial sector? And then we did some work together with the PBL. We could not have done this on our own because we don't have the, let's say, knowledge when it comes to biodiversity. And we published another report called Indebted to Nature. And that focuses on the biodiversity loss and basically distinguishes both between fiscal risks as well as transition risks, parallel to what you have in the area of climate change. And what we did, it's a first analysis. We are on this topic, we are definitely not as far, I think, as we are in the area of climate change. But at least we were able to come up with an estimate of the dependency of the financial sector on what we call ecosystem services. So sectors that are in a way endangered or at risk if biodiversity losses indeed would occur. And the exposure for the Dutch financial sector is about 510 billion euros. That's a third of the whole portfolio that we looked at. So that's really large. And these are only so-called first-order effects. And you can also look at, of course, second-order effects. And one of the things that we did here, just to give you an example, and we looked at one specific item that's animal pollination. To give you an example, when a Dutch financial institution invests in a cacao farmer, that is a crop which is for 95% dependent on animal pollination, that we would regard as a first order effect. But there are also companies like Unilever, for instance, or Nestle, that depend on cacao indirectly. They use, for instance, cacao to produce chocolate ice creams. And that is what we call the second order effects. And I will not dwell too much on how we computed those second order effects, but for banks, insurance companies, and pension funds combined in the Netherlands, we are talking about an exposure of 28 billion euros to assets that are associated with crops that depend on animal pollination. And to put the number into perspective, the exposure to the industries where pollination-dependent products are important, that's agriculture, food processing, and textile processing industries, equals a little bit more than 100 billion euros. So almost 1/3 of this exposure is dependent on animal pollination. So we're really talking about big numbers. This is more or less where we are. So compared to climate change, I would say scratching the surface, still a lot of work to do, but that's also our intention. We'll probably come back to that later. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thanks so much, Olaf, for sharing the very insightful results from this research. And so it's really about the new partnerships, and also I think the second and the first round of effects of this is something we really need to look into much deeper, if I may. Claudia, if you hear this from an investment perspective, is it already on the agenda of investors?
Yes, very much so. So as APT, we are of course subject to supervision by the Dutch Central Bank, who worldwide has been recognized as being very progressive. And biodiversity is, we have been on a long journey on climate change, and there are lessons that we can learn from, and when it comes also to addressing biodiversity risk. So as a fiduciary manager of Dutch pension funds, we implement their policies. And ABP, who is the largest, they have framed their 2025 responsible investment policy in the context of 3 transitions. So that is the climate and energy transition, the digital transition, and the natural resources transition. And I think it's very important. These transitions are, of course, the key transition. And I should say there's a foundation of good human rights practice that underpins it. But it also shows that, in our view, there's a clear connection between the 3. And when we look at the climate-related commitments that have already been made, that is about going for net zero by 2050, Paris aligned by 2030, and also carbon footprint reduction of 40% over 2015. Climate and biodiversity risk are connected, but they are quite different in nature. However, from when you look at how you would implement it as an asset manager, there are some similarities that I could perhaps share and also link it to another of our focus areas. So environmental, social, and governance risks are integral to our overall risk policy. And we also have formulated a dedicated climate risk policy, working with climate risk scenarios to really address climate risk in the portfolio. And there are interesting learnings from that as well, when you look at how can you translate that into traditional financial risks, defining risk budget and limits as per the request of the supervisor. So that is perhaps more of a top-down perspective, but you could look also bottom-up. Our portfolio of now almost 600 billion euros is global and also invests in all kinds of different asset classes. So for the listed side, so for the public side, for capital markets, we have applied something called the inclusion policy, whereby all investments are assessed on their ESG performance, which has an absolute normative and a relative dimension. And those who are considered leaders, we can invest in. Those who are considered laggards, we can only invest in upon the condition of engaging with them to affect change. And environmental factors are part and parcel of this assessment. So while it is not a full, given the lack of data we face, it's not a full biodiversity assessment. It's definitely integrated in that assessment. And that brings me to the second important aspect as an investor, which is about engaging with companies, using your influence to influence them to change and to improve their performance, and also in some cases take the decision to no longer be invested. There's one example, which is Posco Daewoo, where we divested after an intense engagement with the company and NGO groups related to the issue of deforestation. So that's also what we can do. And of course, we have a very strong focus on due diligence also for our private investments, but I may come to that later.
Thanks so much, Claudia, for sharing how you really implement these in the day-to-day business of such a large investment fund. And I really like what you mentioned about engagement. So it's not only like investing or not investing, but also see how you can actually change to the positive the companies you're investing in. You also mentioned a lack of data as being one of the challenges, if I get it correctly. And I think that's an interesting question we can discuss with Matthieu, because with Iceberg Data Lab, I'm really curious to hear how can data really help to quantify the risk, and how can you translate activities of corporates in quantified impacts on biodiversity? Could you please touch on that, Matthieu?
Thank you, Irene. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Excellent. So, hello everyone. Indeed, Iceberg Data Lab is a fintech which was created 2 years ago to develop data solution, especially focused on biodiversity. And to get biodiversity data, you need input, corporate data. We will get back to that later on, and model. And yesterday, during a panel, Mr. Rousseau, the head of the French FRR, underlined that when you have data about what the corporate do, their activity, their pollution, you can model their impact. He was referring to climate, but actually it's true also for biodiversity. Olaf mentioned all the work done by PBL. We do have a set of models allowing us to translate to damage functions, what the company do, the impact of their production, into pollution, into pressures on biodiversity. And so as a data provider, that's exactly what we are doing, the extension of that model and the development of that database to allow investors basically calculate the footprint of the impact of their portfolio on biodiversity. That allows financial institutions to do two things. The first one is a materiality analysis. In other words, where are the risks concentrated in my portfolio, impact on biodiversity, which sectors, which product, which pressures, and a relative positioning analysis, meaning if we reason in terms of services provided, quantity of energy, quantity of calories, quantity of ton kilometers, passengers kilometers, and so on, how intensive a corporate is in terms of pressures compared to its peers for a given level of services. And from that, you can start to have a risk management policy, a stewardship policy like the one mentioned by Claudia, and so on and so on. And it's actually a very similar approach to the one already being implemented by investors, banks, corporates willing to measure their impact on climate. And biodiversity, it's the same process and similar tools, but it's more complex, obviously, because it is multi-layered, which means you have to factor in GHG emissions, change of land use, air pollution, water pollution, and you have to integrate another dimension, which is where the pollution takes place, because it's obviously not the same thing to have a very polluting activity in the middle of a pristine area or in the middle of a barren area. So it's more data intensive in terms of asset level data, for instance, but actually the resources exist, the solution exists. It's more complex, but we are here again at the start of a journey which will allow us to have basically not, and we should remain modest, have a very accurate measurement of the risk, impact, and so on, but at least have a compass which allow our client to point in the direction of the materiality and the merit order of companies. So to give you some figures regarding what we have already done, we have approximately 15% of the lines in a broad corporate universe which concentrate 80% of the impact, which means that it makes sense to measure that, to engage and to have a capital allocation policy factoring that factor, because it is possible to reduce the impact that corporate have on biodiversity, which will depend on its product, processes, supply chain, and where it is important to have a different view, or a view which will come in complement to a climate-based analysis, is that the merit order is not the same. In other words, we have the change of land use and the water pollution representing 2/3 of the impact of a diversified portfolio. So the angle is different. Climate is an input, as mentioned Claudia, it's strongly correlated, but it's not sufficient. You should integrate other factors to be capable to correctly have a fair view of the risk entailed by your portfolio on biodiversity.
Thanks so much, Matthieu. And I think of all the three, the input from the three panelists we heard so far, my outtake is that although we're scratching the surface, I think a lot of people can take inspiration of the things that can already be done and are already being done by the Dutch Central Bank, by APG, by Iceberg Data Lab. But I'm really keen to hearing now from the perspective from an academic, Alexandre, from your perspective, what do you see as key problems in identifying, measuring financial risks stemming from biodiversity loss? And maybe do we need a more structured approach to address these problems?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for this invitation and to give me the possibility to talk about this fundamental subject, because as you recall, we are facing a fundamental crisis, biodiversity crisis beyond climate crisis. And in fact, the first point, as you just said, is that according to me, we have to in some way restructure the way we conceptualize this type of problem and the relationships between biodiversity, business, finance, because at first, the first point is that generally speaking, when we talk about risk, biodiversity risk, we talk about what is called outside-in risk. It means the fact that biodiversity loss, for example, can cause a risk on the business model, on cash flows. And the fundamental problem is absolutely not this one. The first problem is what is called an inside-out risk. It means the fact that the inside business poses a risk on the biodiversity, so the out. And it means that if we want to tackle this issue from what is called a strong sustainability viewpoint, at first we need to address this issue. So how to take into account the risk that business poses on biodiversity before addressing the second issue, which is what is the type of risk that biodiversity loss can pose to business activities and cash flows in the end. So it leads to a second point, which is also a fundamental one. And as you recall, I'm co-director of the ecological accounting chair. And inside the chair, we have several experts of the IPBS, in the business and biodiversity assessment. And in this, from this viewpoint, we work on the notion of good ecological state. It means that, generally speaking, when we conceptualize biodiversity loss and the relationships here again between business and biodiversity, we have some what we can call the flow logic in terms of pollution, consumption, and of services. And so all these concepts are flow logic. And the problem is that when we have to tackle biodiversity, there is a necessity to structure what is the good ecological state, the fundamental good ecological state of biodiversity beyond simple services, beyond simple, stock of value, stock of consumption, or possible consumption. And these points mean that biodiversity must be analyzed and that we have to also find indicators which replace biodiversity in the whole ecosystems. And so that's why, for example, that we need to assess biomarker, which is called biomarker, like different types of insects or different type of animals which are able to be translators of these good ecological state of biodiversity. And the last point I want to mention is the fact that from this viewpoint, the fundamental problem, according to me, is so to refocus investment on the what I can call the real economy, and it means the way finance and investment can directly finance projects which are in line with this perspective of preservation of a good ecological state of biodiversity. And so it leads to some key points. The first point is how to concretely and operationally direct investment towards companies that have little impact on biodiversity itself. So in terms of, here again, the respect of a good ecological state of biodiversity. And second point is, here again, to direct and to target investments to companies with a clear action plan aimed at preserving this type of a good ecological state. And the third point is, here again, to direct and target investment to action that enable the preservation of this, here again, good ecological state. And just to conclude on that point, for instance, the Autorité des marchés financiers, so the French market authority, published and in fact took a clear position last year on this point, claiming that in the area of environment conception of and the relationship between business and environment, if we want to address a social and environmental issue, which is called social and environmental materiality, we have to preserve, this is a term used by the Autorité des marchés financiers, we have to preserve the social ecosystems themselves beyond any consideration of business activities, and so the impact of the environment on business activities. So it means that we absolutely need to preserve biodiversity itself. So yeah, that's my point.
Thanks so much, Alexandre, also for setting out the outside in and turning it to the inside out risk from that perspective. It raises for me also a few questions on how could we address this and really move into action on and what is needed to change. But I think this is really much the second round we're diving into now. And I think that's, I want to start again with Olaf on what do you see as next steps you will take on, and who else need to take action. So for the Dutch Central Bank, what's next? If you look forward a few years ahead, where do you see where do you want the financial sector to be? And what can the financial sector expect from the Dutch Central Bank on this?
Thank you, Irene. Let me again try to make the comparison or the parallel with what we are doing on climate change, and totally realizing that, as also came up during the discussion we had before, that there are also notable differences between the two. But first of all, of course, very important is knowledge sharing, and knowledge sharing within the Dutch, let's say, financial ecosystem, to use that word, but also indeed internationally. We have been contributing to setting up the Task Force of Nature-related Financial Disclosure, the TNFD, which I think is a very good initiative. And again, there is a parallel which can be drawn here again with climate change. So that's one thing. So knowledge sharing, building our expertise, doing more analysis. The second one, indeed, is that we also would have to go, or we will go, to the step of assessing, let's say, what do these risks really mean for financial institutions, and how are they managing those risks? And that's actually what we will do next. So we will investigate how the sector is addressing the loss of biodiversity in their risk management. And on that basis, on the results of that work that we will do, we will probably come up with a publication and distill a number of good practices. And that's also in a way how we started working on climate change. And then, of course, also the question will come up and will arise at a certain point. Is it something that needs, let's say, adaptation of legislation or international standards? And that's also something I think which should be on the table. What in any case could help a lot, and of course that in the end is not a central bank or regulators thing, so to speak, it's a political decision. But if just like we have the Paris Agreement with a clear transition path regarding CO2 emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, it would be good to have something similar for biodiversity. That would work very well, I think, from a risk point of view, but also from a investment opportunity point of view, if we know what the targets are for the international community, because then government also have to make policy to achieve those targets. And I really hope that the UN Convention on Biological Diversity that will take place in China in Kunming will bring us closer to such an international commitment. But this is not in the realm of central banks and supervisors or regulators, but in the hand of politicians. But I think it could help our work in this area tremendously. Thank you.
Thanks, Olaf. And yeah, I think indeed the parallel with climate, but first identifying the macro level of climate risk, and then identifying the good practices that are out there and trying to move the financial sector in that direction. Also, what you mentioned about the political decision needed with the Kunming summit coming up, it would be excellent, I think, to have a smoother transition. I think what you mentioned to contribute to that, if we set clear targets on biodiversity, as we did on the 2 degrees or 1.5, preferably for Paris. So that's, but then I think the Dutch financial sector should really start preparing itself, if it hasn't done so yet, as we heard from Claudia, on seeing this and getting into action on this. So that's, I think, a very powerful message from the Dutch Central Bank here. Claudia, if you hear what everybody has been saying so far, what would you see as like key solutions to address the problem in biodiversity? What would help you in your day-to-day business with the investments to scale up this?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So for us, we very strongly believe in the power of collaborative initiatives. So in the Dutch financial sector, we have been joining the platform Biodiversity Accounting Financials, or PBAF, and that's modeled on a similar climate initiative. Again, trying to understand collectively how to look at biodiversity, and as part of that, there will also be a pilot assessment on biodiversity risk. And I think one example, ABP made a commitment to have now 20% of its assets under management invested into the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, by 2025. When they first put out this ambition in 2015, and we as their fiduciary manager have to implement it, we had the slight challenge that we didn't even know how to identify these investments. So it's somewhat similar in that we again partnered with other asset owners, and we also set up a dedicated AI-driven platform so that we can access more and different kind of data. So I think it's not only the normal structured data, but also the unstructured data that will have to be combined in a manner that can then be implemented in the investment process of large and small investors. And for us, natural stewardship or natural capital stewardship is at the center of our investment policy in agriculture and forestry. And because that is in the best interest of long-term investors and its clients if we preserve that well. So anything that can help us to implement these policies better in terms of tools and data would be most appreciated. And then the nature of collaboration also is such that we also really believe in collective engagements around issues such as deforestation, as palm oil, or also around the agri-forestry nexus. So we want to see more of that too. And last but not least, as an EU-based investor, and I was formerly a member of the EU expert group on sustainable finance, the EU taxonomy is being implemented, and the EU taxonomy has so far focused on climate, but is going to be extended to biodiversity. So through all these kind of tools, more clarity is likely going to be created. And we have also been a member of the tech of the TNFD, and again, hope that this collaborative efforts will help drive the standards and input we need.
Thanks, Claudia. I think that's recognizable words we said on taxonomy, on data, because I think that's also for climate really seen as important contributors to addressing the climate risk. And for biodiversity, we are facing the same. And I really hope that to hear that the taxonomy will be extended to biodiversity. I think that's indeed an important step for that. So, but did you also, did you also partner with new organizations in your work?
No, we have different partners. So we do this through collaborative initiatives. We have partners, but then also we are partners to the investments that we make. And as an investor, we are not only about risk, we're also very much about opportunity and investing in solutions to address sustainability issues, also such as biodiversity. So it is also about finding investable opportunities that actually make this positive difference to, as Alexandre explained, to contribute to the good ecological state. And that's what we're also looking for. So we recently made, for example, an investment in a forest in Chile, and absolutely FSC certified. So it's very much part of our due diligence on the risk side, but it is also that we really actively want to seek investment solutions that we can find.
Mm-hmm. And if you think, okay, what is the biggest boundary you're facing there?
Yeah, we are a large institutional investor, so investment opportunities need to fit our mandate and also our risk appetite, and therefore be also of sufficient size and meet other criteria. And we also really need to understand them. Do we genuinely think that they are sustainable and responsible investments?
Yeah, so maybe it also comes to data again on this question, I think, Claudia.
And structuring,
Yeah.
how are they structured? Can we actually invest into them? And do they genuinely meet our objectives as a responsible investor?
Yeah. Matthieu, what would you think about this, what Claudia said, and what will you think for the next frontiers for Iceberg Data Lab?
Well, first, to try to serve that kind of needs, obviously. And so for that, we work on extending further the scope of what we cover. I mentioned GHG emission, change of land use, air pollution, water pollution. There are other pressures as highlighted by IPBES report like invasive species. And we are working with our scientific partner, iCare and Consult, to see how we can model and approach to be as based on science as possible, okay, and relevant. Have to have a compass and a right merit order. That's very important for us. And at the same time, having a scalable solution. I like to quote Victor Hugo, the work of the telescope stops where the work of the microscope starts. We are a telescope, okay? We are trying to help investors map their risk and steer their capital in the right direction. And for that, we should have level playing field, modeling. So it's not the same tool as a corporate level analysis. And we are trying to expanding this tool with our partner from the steering committee of the corporate biodiversity footprint, 6 asset managers from the Europe and in the Europe and in the UK, where we are also starting to work on a new concept which are very important for investors as well, which is answering the following question: what are the dependency risk of my portfolio, the double materiality? What is a positive impact indicator? And that's the kind of topic on which we should be very transparent first, and second, very cautious. And last but not least, the monetarization question, which is how do you translate that into euros? So we have a roadmap to continue working on that with the support of a scientific committee, and which would allow us, I would say, to organically continue to develop and provide a robust and scalable solution which can be used by investors with a fair degree of confidence to approach their impact on biodiversity.
Thanks, Matthieu. And do you also see a need, or how could you address the issue of consistency of data? Because I think that's also a big of the challenge.
Yes, I would say we can see that at several levels. The first of all is the quality of the incoming data. And that's why, by the way, I don't believe in data cruncher, robo advisor, and so on and so on. The data quality, the incoming data quality. You mentioned structured and unstructured data. We have a lot of data, actually. We don't like data at all, but a lot of them are unstructured. And so you need to have a team, a research team, a team of experts, which are skilled enough to be capable of retreating the data. The added value of the analyst today, environmental analyst, financial analyst, any kind of analyst, is not anymore in data collection, is in retreatment. Making sure that when a company reports data, for instance, the scope of reporting is consistent with the scope we adopted. We map the impact on the scope 3, downstream and upstream. And so it means that if we don't have that reported, we have to model it and making sure that we are providing something which is comparable. That's the first thing. The second thing, and that's directly on our playing field, is to control the consistency of our model. So we have an economical model. Here it's quite simple. We compare what the model gives compared to what the company report whenever they report. And so depending, and so it's extremely granular between country, year, and commodity. We have a matrix with 4 billion points. So it's quite granular, but indeed, if you want to model correctly the impact of the company, you have to do that kind of analysis. Now, the where we are extremely cautious and get the feedback of our scientific committee and so on is, again, do we have a compass pointing in the right direction? And in other words, when we provide a merit order, is the merit order correct? And on that, we rely on scientific publication. I mentioned some figures about the concentration of the impact, meaning of the pollution, their distribution along sector, and we check that the calculation we do are consistent with the study which are published by PBL and by scientific academic studies to make sure that in terms of materiality, we are not misleading. That's very important. I would say that the last step is transparency. That's why we will publish our methodology to allow academics to challenge it, understand it, understand the result and the merit order that we provide. And last but not least, the constituents themselves, which should eventually trigger a virtuous circle whereby the companies which estimate that their impact are overestimated will be capable of providing us feedback and making allowing us to make sure that whenever we overestimate an impact or we underestimate it, we are capable of adjusting that. So it's obviously a journey, an iterative process, and here obviously I think that increasing regulatory demand, green taxonomy was mentioned, stress test will help obviously because it will foster transparency, increasing demand from investors to map that kind of risk, therefore for the team to have budget to do that, and so on and so on.
Thanks, Matthieu, for setting this out so clearly. And I think it's also what you said, the compass in the right direction helps from scientists. And I think what Olaf mentioned, to also have the compass in the right direction from the political side in Kunming, hopefully. Alexandre, if you think about the things you heard so far, and I think a few of the questions that came up, and one of the buzzwords in this conference has been mandatory disclosure. I think that's we've been hearing that a lot. And when I heard your first intervention, I also thought, okay, we might need to kind of calculate the value of nature more, and would something like a carbon price for nature, like we've heard about the carbon price a lot to address the climate issue. Is there something like that also feasible or thinkable for the biodiversity issue?
In fact, yeah, we needed to connect biodiversity and general environmental issues with financial issues or financial assessments, but in fact not on the basis of pricing of values, but on the principle of cost, because in fact, and that's a key point, according to me, is that we really have bioeconomic models from the 70s. We have a huge set of papers, of scientific papers on that point, which show that if we assess environmental issues through valuation based on discounting cash flows, or on pricing market prices, pricing, sorry, it leads to some levels of preservation which are not aligned with ecological requirements. And that point, unfortunately, is not enough known, in fact, and present in today's debate. So that's why, according to me, we need to connect, as I said, so extra-financial data information with financial information, and at first in the area of accounting systems. So we need to develop integrated accounting system, and it's something which is mentioned in the today's European Action Plan for Sustainable Finance, but unfortunately, which is not completely done at the present time. But this integration must be done, as I said, not on the basis of value, but on the basis of cost. And the cost means the cost of action, of precise action to be taken to preserve biodiversity, and thus to indicate clearly to investors what to finance and why to finance these type of action. So I can give a simple example. The problem today, and I discussed this point with a lot of banks and asset managers, it's that if we want really to to know how to how to develop a particular type of business which is in line with ecological requirements, we absolutely know we need to know what are the cost we have to cover in terms of investments in order to be able to implement these action plans, in fact. And so we also need to see precisely in the accounting system the level of debt that the company can accumulate by not implementing measures to preserve the good ecological state of biodiversity. And so here again, I give an example. The first performance, financial performance of a business is not directly profitability, is solvency. So it means that a firm which is profitable but with no clear solvency is not a good investment. So it should be the same thing with in terms of biodiversity. A firm with a good profitability but bad ecological solvency, it means with a huge level of debt towards environment, towards biodiversity, couldn't not be seen from the viewpoint of investors as a good investment. And so this type of system exists, in fact. For example, here again, in the ecological accounting share, we are working with a lot of partners, investor, professionals, extra, on what is called the CARE model, which means comprehensive accounting in respect of ecology, which is a complete integrating system, account system, which is based on this type of ideas. And the other point I want to mention is that, as I said, generally speaking, in this type of debates, we also need to open up the debate to scientists, bioeconomists, extra, because, as I said, for example, it's absolutely clear that in this type of debates, we need to be aware of some scientific results, scientific debates on this connection between financial and non-financial information. And the second point is that if we open up the debate to other type of scientists, economists, extra, it's able to also see that, for example, in national accounting, there are some proposals, and I mean very operational proposals, which could be some kind of example and inspiration for business activities and investors to structure data to have ideas to be able to implement specific tools to assess biodiversity. This is an example. So to use, in fact, the tools and operational tools, already developed in other areas, so in science, in national accounting systems, etc., and to implement them, or to give ideas to implement these concepts to business activities and investment activities to be able to preserve biodiversity and assess biodiversity.
Thanks, Alexandre, for setting it out, like the whole perspective from the accountancy and how can we see on how we value that. I don't see any Q&As yet in the box. If you have any, please put them in. For now, I would like to ask maybe Claudia or Olaf, what would you see as a way to integrate, like to value biodiversity within the financial system? Because I think that's a big challenge we're facing. Is it from the risk side, or can we move to the impact investments, or how can we price biodiversity in the financial system? Do you have any views on that? Olaf, you want to go first, or Claudia? Ladies first. Then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How do you price it in? I think you probably initially have to start by understanding where the risks are and where the impacts are on nature, and once you have, and then attributing the financial value to it will be we see it, of course, in some companies who have a high dependency in their supply chain on natural resources, that there is a very direct cost and price associated with biodiversity loss, with biodiversity decline, etc. So you can kind of price it from that side, but being able to put it as a price into financial models, I think that still requires quite a bit more work. But again, I really want to stress it is already now part of our due diligence, regardless of whether we are fully able to price it in, because it is a risk factor that you can assess. And you also have to assess, do you think that this investment operates in a manner that is acceptable for us to provide capital to them? So that I think is also a dimension we shouldn't forget. And the current, perhaps somewhat limited ability to price it should not stand in the way of conducting these assessments and taking a clear view on the acceptability of investments. And with impact, yeah, that's what I tried to say when I mentioned it's about opportunity, that you look for investments that make a positive contribution to addressing the challenges set out in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which also captures biodiversity themes. So that focus on looking at the core business of what does an investment do, and do we want to support that? Do we want to support this activity? That, I think, is another lens than purely the risk side, and one that we find very important, making actually a positive contribution.
Yeah, thanks so much. I see that my screen freezes sometimes, but I'm still alive, I have to say. But thanks, Claudia, for this. Olaf, what are your views on this? The transition path we need from governments?
Thank you, Irene. I think that pricing in is complicated in this particular example. I mean, climate change, it's easier, let's put it that way, because you can put a tax on the emission of CO2 or greenhouse gases, and you will know that that's relatively easy. Let aside the the political complexities of this kind of policy. In the case of biodiversity, it's not straightforward. What the tax base would be, if you look at it from that point of view. And you may also look at setting, let's say, targets or ceilings. If you look at something that's very, as you know, a very hot topic in the Netherlands, that's the pollution or emission of ammonia. And there, pricing the emission is maybe part of the solution, but it's much better to just put a ceiling, because we are mainly talking about animal manure. So, and also in biodiversity, because the topic is so broad, and we're talking about so many different, let's say, ecological effects, that pricing in will be more complicated. However, having said that, and I still think it's good to do work on that and collect data and all the like, and what was said before. But then maybe you should, and I'm looking at it from a prudential point of view, prudential supervision point of view. Yeah, maybe you should try to make it also more simple, and look more at concentration risk, and maybe you should come with measures that, let's say, mitigate the concentration risk that financial institutions could have on certain sectors that are really exposed to biodiversity loss. It's also not, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's relatively easy compared to some of the other measures that you could take. So that's a little bit how I see it. So it is, when it comes to valuation, valuing or assessing risks, I think you need to be more precise and this, it may also be a little bit more complicated, I think, than climate. But having said that, that's not a reason not to do it, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Olaf. Yeah, I think that's a very positive way to look at it, to see, okay, we can't solve the whole problem, but which elements can we solve, and we can start working on. And also what Claudia said, although it's not a risk yet, what is the impact you want to have as an investor, or what is your own perspective on that? I think those are very concrete ways to already address this issue, although it's maybe like climate, it's not a pressing risk now, but it's likely to develop and to become bigger in the future, and we have to take action now to address that. We're coming now to the roundup of this panel, and before we finish, I want to ask everyone to really, so we can really grasp the content of this, all the very, the big content of this panel together in a few words. So that's always a challenge. So I want to ask everyone, describe in 1 or 2 words what would contribute most to have investment adapting to integrate biodiversity laws. And Matthieu, may I start with you?
Thank you, Irene. I would say, since many institutions are in the journey of mapping, documenting, reporting, testing their impact on climate, biodiversity, like climate, is an issue that is, you know, the challenges of our generation, to curb biodiversity loss, and to fight and mitigate the consequence of climate change. So since we are all jointly working on dealing with that, use the opportunity of all that effort in terms of restructuration, reallocation of flows, teams, and so on, to onboard biodiversity as well, because we have CDP, we have COP on both topics: regulatory demand, pressure, taxes, change in consumers, change habits, and so on, will come to for biodiversity. So let's face the 2 issues at the same time, and integrate that constraint, that challenge as well. And I would say that this message comes for the data providers to develop tools and so on, adapted to that issue. For financial institution to have processes, risk reporting, investment policies in relation to that, and to regulator to, I would say, take the opportunity of the development of rules, stress test, and so on, that thematic to onboard also biodiversity.
And to sum up, what are the 1 or 2 words you would say?
1 or 2 words, I would say that measuring biodiversity is a nice to must have constraint. Must have because we have to measure it, and nice because it is a broader and a more holistic view. You can look and have an interesting view of the challenges and opportunities in new sectors, textile, tourism, and so on, which are generally out of the scope of a purely climate-focused approach. So it's broader and allows the opportunity to engage with a broader client base.
So measuring, right? Start measuring the biodiversity. Yeah, great. Yeah, great.
Measuring, yes.
Yeah,
measuring.
Good. Thanks so much, Matthieu. Claudia, what would come to your mind here?
To keep it really short, invest as if it matters.
Invest as if it
matters, and then you will do your very best with the current available tooling, etc., to take account of biodiversity risk and opportunity as well.
Yeah. Great, thanks. And Alexandre, what are your 1 or 2 words?
1 or 2 words. I mean, 1 or 2 concepts. I mean, science and good ecological states, precisely targeting investments and well-designed accounting systems.
So, well-designed accounting systems for biodiversity. Can I summarize it like that?
To be able to target investments in terms of to structure action plan for preservation of biodiversity.
Yeah. Okay, Olaf, what would your word be, or 2 words?
Yeah, you're asking for 1 word. I will give you 1 word: collaboration. That would be my word. So I think it's really important to work together with others on this issue, and that's, first of all, I'm talking from our own experience here, working together with the PBL. I think it was a big success, and secondly, it is just like climate change, but here probably even more. It is such a subject that let's say requires specialized expertise. And if you are a financial institution and you want to deal with this issue, either, let's say, from the point of view of risk or from the point of view of impact investment, you need to team up with somebody who has the expertise. So collaboration would be my word.
Thanks so much. I think we have a great summary of this panel with measuring the risk and invest as if it matters. Do already with the tools you have today and use them, and then get the well-design of accounting to target investments, decisions on biodiversity. And then we can't do this alone. We're all in this together. We need collaboration and work with new partners to address this issue. Finally, you probably are aware of Earth Overshoot Day. So this is the day that we used all the resources that the planet can offer in 1 year. And this year, I think it's expected to be the 29th of July. And each year it goes shorter in time. And I really hope that this panel and all the people who are working on this issue will help to change this direction of this Earth Overshoot Day and get it back to the 31st of December, or maybe to the next year, so we have a bit of more resources we can live it with. And finally, thanks so much, all panelists, for your valuable input and sharing your thoughts. And I really hope it inspires many of us working in the financial sector to already start doing what they can to address this important issue. Thanks so much, and hope to see you again.
Thank you, Irene, and everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.